The first ray of sunlight slipped through the loose curtain and tickled Tammy's nose. She squeezed her eyes shut in her sleep, stretched, and sneezed. Opening her eyes with a sweet yawn, she patted the space next to her. Garrett was already gone again. He left me at the crack of dawn without waking me. Lately, Garrett had been working a lot. He was back in the office preparing major projects, practically disappearing there 24 hours a day. He came home late, slept briefly, and returned to his beloved work. Tammy pulled on her robe and went into the kitchen. She had prepared her husband's breakfast the night before, but the stuffed pancakes remained untouched. Again, he only drank coffee. "Oh, Garrett," Tammy sighed. "You're working too hard, poor thing." She had tried to get up early to see her husband off to work, but this morning she had overslept, and he apparently hadn't woken her. "At least I made breakfast last night, but what for? He didn't even taste it." "Well, at least I will make sure Rosalie eats breakfast." Tammy peeked into the nursery. 10-year-old Rosalie was asleep, cuddled up with a teddy bear. The woman smiled. "What a sweet sleeper. It's almost a shame to wake her up." "Let her sleep a little longer." Tammy returned to the kitchen, put the pancakes in the microwave, poured milk into a pot, and turned on the gas. She pondered for a moment how many years her mornings had started the same way. Her husband rushing to work, her daughter getting ready for kindergarten, now for school, and the kitchen always the kitchen. Yes, she was a housewife now, but 12 years ago, everything was different. She had envisioned a different future. The milk in the saucepan sizzled, and a puffy cap rushed up. Tammy snapped back to reality, shaking her head. Enough of these memories. It's time to make cocoa. A few minutes later, the aroma of chocolate wafted through the kitchen. The pancakes had long since heated up, so breakfast was ready. Tammy anxiously glanced at the clock. It was already time to wake up Rosalie. "Daughter, get up," she called into the nursery. "Breakfast is on the table," Mommy Rosalie mumbled sleepily, clutching her toy tighter. "5 more minutes." "1 minute," Tammy replied firmly. "Come on, open your eyes and head to the bathroom." The daughter sighed heavily and sat up in bed. "Mom, I had such a dream," she said, yawning. "We had moved out of town. We had this huge, beautiful summer house like a palace, and I was walking there. I don't remember anything else. You woke me up." "I'm sorry, my dear," Tammy smiled. "You'll continue it next time." "Yeah, right," Rosalie grumbled and slipped into the bathroom. Barefoot, with homework, school, and music lessons, no time to live. "Not in my dreams. Not in real life. Your slippers are in the bathroom," Tammy laughed in response. An hour later, she saw her daughter off to school. Thankfully, it was just across the street. After kissing Rosalie goodbye, Tammy decided to walk around the city with her camera. Today, she was heading to the park. It was spring, the time when all living things remember to blossom and perfume the air, delighting the world with rich colors. The apple trees in the park were dazzlingly beautiful in their snow-white garb, and the sprawling lilacs caught the eye with their flowery outfits. Tammy loved taking pictures of nature and people. How she cherished this activity. At some point, she decided to take a break and enjoyed the surroundings. She sat on a bench and closed her eyes. Nearby, birds were trilling in the bushes. "Mom, are you a photographer?" a thin voice asked. Tammy opened her eyes in surprise to see a boy of about 5 standing next to the bench. "No, kid, I'm just taking pictures for fun," she replied. "Why?" The boy raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What do you use the pictures for? Just for enjoyment?" The child nodded understandingly. "What a sweet little boy," Tammy thought to herself. "Would you like me to take a picture of you?" she suggested. "Who are you here with?" "I'm alone," the boy replied. "What do you mean, alone?" "Why? Where's your mom?" "Mommy. Mommy's in heaven and Daddy's working. I'm with Grandma now. She sent me to the store to get bread, and you go alone. What's the big deal?" The boy shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, I've been talking too long." He waved his arms comically and ran to the nearby grocery store. Tammy watched him go. What a pity, such a little boy and already without a mother, so independent. But it's not right that he's running around alone. She decided she would wait for him to return, suddenly feeling the urge to help this unusual child. Watching the store entrance, Tammy took a few more pictures. Soon, the boy emerged with a loaf and practically hopped along the path. His wavy blonde hair fluttered lightly in the warm breeze. He smiled so carefree, jumping up and down, clutching the loaf to his chest, that Tammy couldn't resist capturing the moment. "What a great shot!" "Mom, did you take my picture?" the boy asked, running up to Tammy. "Yes," she nodded, and showed him the image on the display. "Do you like it?" "It's okay." He nodded a little reservedly and looked at her shyly. "Can you make me a card I can?" Tammy smiled. "Next time we meet, I'll give you a picture. Now let me walk you home. My name's Tammy," she introduced herself. "And mine is Eric," he smiled back. "I live in that house over there." He pointed with his pen to an old 5-story building, its roof visible from the edge of the park. "And I live in that house over there." Tammy pointed to their new building. "You live in a nice house," Eric said. "I haven't seen you here before. My dad and I recently moved in with my grandmother," he explained. "He's at work all the time now, and I'm with my grandmother since there's no room at the daycare center." Chatting, they reached the 5-story building. Tammy promised to return in a couple of days with a picture for the boy. He promised to be there. Returning home, Tammy reflected on life's unfairness. Here was a good, wonderful boy with an apparently difficult life. His mother gone, his father always working, his grandmother likely ill. She remembered her own story. Tammy, too, grew up with her grandmother after her parents died in an accident. Grandma Ingrid did everything to ensure her granddaughter grew up to be a decent person. She insisted Tammy attend art school after regular classes, recognizing her talent for drawing. However, after graduating, Tammy became more interested in photography. Soon, a fashion magazine noticed her work and offered her a job. Thus, she became a photojournalist. One day, she was assigned to photograph a young, successful businessman. After a successful photo shoot, he surprisingly invited her on a romantic date, which Tammy accepted. So began her romance with Garrett. The girl was overjoyed. He was rich, handsome, and caring. When Garrett proposed, Tammy didn't hesitate for a second. However, Grandma Ingrid didn't share her granddaughter's enthusiasm. "Oh, Tammy, this Garrett seems slippery," the old lady said. "Maybe there's no need to rush. Get to know each other a bit more." Grandma Tammy laughed. "Garrett isn't slippery. He's the best in the world." "Oh, I don't know," sighed Grandma Ingrid. A month before the wedding, Grandma Ingrid passed away. Tammy, deeply upset, wanted to cancel the wedding, but Garrett insisted on proceeding. Guests were invited, the restaurant paid for. Though sad about Grandma Ingrid, Tammy reasoned that she was over 70 and listened to her future husband, as she would continue to do. At first, Garrett insisted Tammy stopped communicating with her school friends. This wasn't difficult as they only spoke once a year anyway. Then, he demanded she quit her job. Though reluctant, Tammy was 3 months pregnant and didn't think long about it. She wanted to care for the house and her husband. When Rosalie was born, thoughts of work faded entirely. For years, Tammy's life narrowed to the confines of their apartment, a nice 2-level home with excellent renovations and good furniture. What else did she need? She had everything: a child, a husband, wealth. Garrett earned well as the director of a trading firm. But as time passed, Tammy felt stifled, yearning to escape her golden cage, if only for a few hours. She even dreamed of returning to the magazine, but when Garrett learned of her aspirations, he objected. "My wife will stay at home," he declared. "Why should you bother? Don't you have enough money?" "Enough," Tammy thought indignantly. "But I want to pursue my profession. All I do is cook, clean, and shop. And what about Rosalie? If you work, the child will be left alone all day." "Tammy, that's reckless. A woman is, first and foremost, a mother and wife." "No, I'm against you working," he said. Realizing she couldn't change her husband's mind, Tammy tried to forget her dreams. But occasionally she ventured out with her camera just for herself, like the time she met the precocious Eric. 2 days later, as promised, she returned to the park with photos for the boy. Here Eric arrived promptly, grinning from ear to ear. "Tammy, you came," he shouted joyfully, running up. "Of course I did. I promised," Tammy replied, handing him the pictures. "Oh, how nice they are," the boy admired. "Tammy, you're a professional." Tammy smiled sadly. "Are you shopping again today?" "No, I'm going to the pharmacy," the boy sighed. "Grandma's sick. I need to buy some medicine. Will they sell it to you?" "I don't know," the boy hesitated, looking uncertainly at Tammy. "Let me help you," she offered. "What medicine do you need?" The boy timidly held out a list of medicines and money. "Put that away," Tammy said, pointing to the money. "But why? These medicines cost very little." Tammy reassured him. Of course, it wasn't entirely true, but she wanted to support the boy. It was clear that he, his grandmother, and his father lived simply, if not poorly. The boy wore old clothes, though they were clean. She walked him home again from the pharmacy. The next day, as Tammy was returning home with Rosalie, she encountered Eric and a tall, scowling man in the park. He appeared to be in his 40s, tired, with slightly silvered temples. Life had clearly not been kind to him. "Papa," Eric shrieked when he saw Tammy. "That's that mom." The boy rushed to meet her, but the man stopped, grabbing his arm. "So it was you who took pictures of my son and bought his grandmother's medicine, right?" he asked in a muffled voice. "Yes," Tammy stammered, disconcerted. "Let me ask you, what do you want with my child? You have a daughter, I see. We're just friends, and I wanted to do something nice for him." "I'll ask you not to do anything like that again," the man muttered as he walked away, holding Eric's hand. He looked back guiltily at Tammy, and he was clearly on the verge of tears. But the woman couldn't calm him down. His father was too disgruntled. "Really, why does she need this boy?" "His father is right. She is a stranger to him." "Mom, who is that?" Rosalie asked, surprised. "Just a boy," Tammy replied with a sigh. "Let's go home. I made your favorite berry pie today at home." Watching her daughter devour another piece of pie with pleasure, Tammy finally calmed down. "That's it. We must forget this story. This is why you shouldn't do good deeds for people." But Tammy was afraid to admit to herself why she was suddenly drawn to this blonde-haired Eric. He reminded her of someone, but there was something else. 5 years ago, she had lost a child in childbirth. It was her second pregnancy with Garrett, and everything seemed fine, but something went wrong at the hospital. The baby was born fragile. The doctor said it was due to birth trauma, and if he survived, he would be mentally impaired. They suggested giving him up. Tammy was against it, but Garrett convinced her otherwise. Tammy will torture ourselves and him. Let's give him up. We'll have a normal child later, and this one he's not likely to survive anyway. Hearing these words, Tammy had a hysterical episode. They barely calmed her down, and in the morning they told her the baby hadn't survived. Tammy collapsed from worry. She spent another month in the hospital and never saw the baby. Garrett buried Bobby, as Tammy had named him. Now Tammy visited his grave every year. God didn't send any more children to her and Garrett, so there was only Rosalie. Yes, seeing Eric, Tammy involuntarily reached out to him like a son. That evening, she told her husband about the boy and his father. Garrett listened, frowning. I'll never understand your desire to be good to everyone. That's why you need this kid. You have a daughter at home, household duties, and you're wandering around parks, he muttered. Garrett, I go to the parks, as you put it, because my soul yearns for it. My hands itch for the camera. They'd be better off reaching for the vacuum cleaner or the oven. Are you saying I'm a bad homemaker? Tammy was indignant. I'm not saying anything of the sort. It's just that your place is at home, not running around with a camera through the bushes like a girl. Garrett, I just wanted to share this with you. That man got angry at me for no reason. He hasn't scolded you enough. That night they had a big fight. Tammy shouted that Garrett in the end didn't see her as a person, just a housewife. Garrett, not one to mince words, retorted, since you married a serious man, stop hanging around the city. In the end, Garrett left, slamming the door. Rosalie, who had heard everything, came out of her room and went to her mother, hugging her and wiping away her rare tears. Mommy, don't cry, whispered the daughter. You're the best, and you take pictures better than anyone else. By the way, our class teacher said we need a photographer for graduation. Can you do it? Yes, of course. Tammy smiled, pulling herself together. She already called me. You'll have a great photo shoot. Tammy was already asleep when Garrett returned. Their daughter, too. He looked into the bedroom and nursery, then quietly headed for the living room. Taking the phone, he called someone and talked for a while. Afterward, he sat by the open window smoking. He was deep in thought about something that tormented him. In the morning, Garrett left early, as usual. Tammy, having seen her daughter off to school, returned home. In the living room, she saw the phone on the sofa. Garrett forgot it. How could he manage without his phone? Tammy decided to take it to his office. On the way, she couldn't resist peeking through the messages in her husband's contacts. Nothing interesting, as expected, but then she read a strange message. Tomorrow I'm waiting for you at the cafe by the tower at 10 p.m. The message had come at night from an unknown number who scheduled an appointment with Garrett. Was it work? It didn't seem like it. It's too late. Tammy decided that Garrett would tell her everything himself. Garrett's secretary, seeing Tammy, smiled and offered to make tea. He has a representative of app competitors currently, she whispered. They're looking for common ground, so to speak. Okay, I'll wait, Tammy nodded. The wait lasted about an hour. At first, silence reigned in the office. Then raised voices could be heard. Evidently, the diplomatic conversation had failed. As the competitors left, slamming the door, Tammy entered the office to find her husband irritated and flushed. What are you doing here? He asked. Eyebrows raised in surprise. You forgot your cell phone, Tammy said softly. I thought you might need it during the day. Everything's upside down today. I didn't even notice I'd left my phone at home. Are you going to be home early? I wanted to make something special. No, I'm sorry. I've got a lot to do. You're not going to work until night, are you? Garrett simply lowered his eyes and shook his head without answering. Doubt crept into Tammy's heart. Was her husband cheating? She couldn't stop thinking about that text message. Suddenly, everything seemed to fall into place. Somehow, her husband's late returns home had become the norm. He leaves early, he's irritable, clearly hiding something from me. He definitely has a mistress, she thought, and decided to follow her husband. That evening, she went to the cafe mentioned in the message. She found a table away from the entrance, hidden behind a large aquarium that shielded her from view while giving her a clear line of sight. Perfect. Tammy was waiting. For some reason, she knew immediately when the other woman arrived, a tall, slender brunette who entered the cafe, looked around disdainfully, and sat at a window table. Soon after, Garrett arrived and headed straight for the brunette. Tammy's impulse was to jump up, confront them, slap her husband, and claw at this insolent girl's hair, but she restrained herself. Garrett smiled at the brunette and sat beside her. Tammy couldn't hear their conversation. She could only see Garrett's back and the woman's sweet smile. Tammy's heart pounded, and tears welled in her eyes. I wonder what he'd say if I went over there now, but Tammy's legs felt like cotton. She had no strength to stand. She decided to call him. The phone rang, but Garrett rejected the call, engrossed in conversation with the brunette. Tammy dialed again. Yes, dear. Did you want something? He asked, slightly annoyed. Hi, Garrett, Tammy said as quietly as possible. Where are you now, Tammy? I'm in a meeting. It's not a good time to talk. I'll be home late. He hung up. He'll be late at a meeting. What a liar, she thought and cried. For years, Tammy had been sure Garrett loved her. They'd been through so much together, and now he dared to act like this. For what? Because I gave him the best years of my life. Because I slave away at home all day, not hiring help even though we can afford it. Why did I give up my dream and quit my job at the magazine? Tammy pondered what to do next. Then the brunette stood and headed for the exit. Garrett, following, opened his car door for this woman. She smiled at him. He smiled back, saying something. Traitor, Tammy whispered, wiping tears from her face. You'll regret this. A thirst for vengeance gripped her heart. She didn't know how yet, but she was determined to make her husband pay for this betrayal. Should I confront him now? What did I actually see? Just my husband sitting with another woman in a cafe. He'll easily justify himself. He'll claim it was a business meeting, never mind that it's 11 p.m. He'll deny that they were smiling at each other. He'll make it sound believable. Tammy had no doubt about that. Now, a storm raged in her soul. So while I cook his meals and iron his shirts, he's out having fun with other women, telling me to stay at home. He's made himself quite comfortable. Tammy decided to catch him red-handed and then confront him with all her accusations. She ran out of the cafe and hailed a cab. Follow that black Audi, she commanded the driver of the old car. The older man nodded. Are we following someone or catching up? Following, I think, Tammy said. Husband. Yes, the driver shook his head and smoothly merged into the right lane. Surprisingly, the old car kept up easily, and Garrett's car remained in sight. Tammy couldn't understand where her husband was going. There were no hotels in this area. Is he really going to that girl's home? He's got some nerve. Soon, Garrett's car turned into an alley and stopped at the maternity hospital. Tammy's heart clenched. This was where she had given birth to her Bobby. The girl got out of the car, waved to Garrett, and lightly ran up the steps of the building. So she works here, Tammy muttered. Let's get out of here. Please, can you take a roundabout way so I can be home before my husband? The old driver nodded understandingly. Tammy had already changed into her home clothes when she heard the door lock click. As if nothing had happened, Garrett stepped into the house. Hello, dear, he smiled. I'm so tired today. Such a hard day. Will you feed me? Eat whatever you find in the refrigerator, Tammy said indifferently, and went to her daughter's room. She decided to sleep with her. She couldn't bear to look at Garrett. Garrett watched her go with a surprised look but didn't say a word. In the morning, Tammy purposefully stayed in bed until he left for work. Then she got up and woke her daughter. Rise and shine, sleepyhead, she said with a smile. Only 1 week of school left. That's right, Rosalie smiled, stretching. How great. Dad will take a vacation. Where will we go this year? Dad's been quiet about it. I don't want to go to the sea. Maybe the mountains, Tammy replied absent-mindedly. Now let's get ready for school. We need to find out everything about the photo shoot today. Afterward, there was a flurry of activity because of the daughter's celebration. Garrett was still at work until late. Tammy remained silent, pondering the situation. She decided not to make a fuss, but seeing Garrett was difficult for her, especially imagining him with someone else. Naturally, Garrett missed the 4th grade graduation, citing his workload. Rosalie pouted a little, but her mom arranged such a wonderful photo shoot, and the other parents contributed so much to the celebration that the girl forgot about her dad's absence. The important thing is that you were here, Rosalie said when they returned home. Mommy, you're wonderful. Thank you, sweetie, Tammy smiled. But it quickly faded as she saw the brunette leaving their building. Was she really in our apartment? If Garrett is home, she must be. Sure enough, Garrett opened the door for them, wearing his robe after a shower. Hello, my girls, he smiled. I had an accident today. An accident? Rosalie was horrified. Not a car accident. At work, the secretary spilled coffee on me, twisted her ankle, and the cup fell right on my white shirt. I'm not sure if it can be washed or not. Just throw it away, Tammy replied indifferently, her mind on the brunette. How long have you been home? About 10 minutes. I thought I'd take a quick shower given the circumstances. I see. Tammy smirked and said nothing but took the ruined shirt and tossed it in the trash can in front of her surprised husband. Couldn't you at least try to wash it? It's a good shirt, Garrett said, confused, but Tammy seemed not to hear him. She kept thinking about the brunette. Garrett's home, naked, entertaining a mistress. Well then, I'll start a photo hunt. It's convenient today since Rosalie is going to her friends for a few hours, and the grown-ups will look after her. In short, after dropping her daughter off at her friend's house, Tammy went to her husband's, having hired another cab driver. The rest of the day passed without incident. Garrett didn't leave the office, but at 7:00, he came out and drove to the same cafe. Tammy managed to photograph her husband with the brunette they met. The girl kissed Garrett on the cheek. They sat at the table. This time, Tammy clearly saw their relationship was far from professional. But who was she? Not knowing her, Tammy decided to go to the maternity hospital where Garrett had first driven the girl. The next day, she was in the head doctor's office. What did you want from Amala? The head doctor asked, looking at a picture of the woman with her hand on Garrett's shoulder. "I want her to stay away from the man sitting next to her," Tammy replied. "He's my husband. I love him, but I can see he's infatuated with Mara. Have you talked to your husband?" "No, I'm struggling. I don't know where to start. I don't want to lose him, but I can't bear this situation any longer. I thought you, as her employer, could influence your employee." "I'll try." The doctor nodded and looked carefully at Tammy, then at the photograph again. "Listen, I think I've seen you before. You and your spouse, yes? I'm Tammy Kingler. 5 years ago, my baby died in your clinic. I would never come here. But your employee is being more than provocative." Klingler, the doctor's face changed as he remembered. Yes, I recall. It's a pity it happened like that. Don't worry about Mara. She's a good pediatric nurse, but she's quite the flirt. If she's having an affair with your husband, I'll put her in her place quickly." "I doubt it," Tammy smirked. "But at least try." Tammy left the clinic and froze on the building's porch, her heart pounding. Yes, 5 years ago she had felt terrible here, and now her emotions were no better. Is that why I came here in the first place? To hope that this brazen nurse can somehow be stopped. And Garrett, how do I keep living with him? Tammy rounded the corner and sat on a bench next to the building. She closed her eyes. Then she heard a woman's voice from a nearby open window. "Hello, Garrett," Tammy heard. "It's me. Listen, your wife came here. Turns out she thinks we're having an affair." Tammy cautiously peered through the window and saw Mara. She was standing half-turned, looking at herself in the mirror while talking on the phone. "All these years, I wouldn't mind hooking up with you, but you're resisting for some reason." "Why? Oh, stop yelling, Garrett. Don't get so worked up." Hearing this, Tammy recoiled and pressed herself against the wall. "So Garrett's not cheating on me, and I was making it up." Tammy felt relieved, but what she heard next froze her in place. "Garrett, the head doctor recognized your wife and yelled at me for what? For communicating with you. What if she finds out? She thinks your son is dead. What if, purely hypothetically, she gets an idea?" Garrett shouted something into the receiver. Mara made excuses, but Tammy wasn't listening anymore. Everything suddenly blurred before her eyes. She didn't know how long she sat there until someone touched her shoulder. Tammy looked up to see an elderly woman in a white coat standing next to her. She looked like a nurse. "Hi, honey. Are you feeling ill?" the elderly woman asked kindly. "Should I call a doctor?" "No, thank you. That won't be necessary." Tammy shook her head. "A doctor can't help me. What's troubling you?" "I just realized the man I loved has betrayed me." "Did your husband cheat on you?" "Don't worry, he'll come back. They're all like that. Once he sobers up, he'll return to his wife and kids." If only that were the main problem. Tammy looked at the elderly woman's kind face. A thought struck her. "Excuse me, but have you been working at this maternity hospital for long?" "Yes. For half of my work life, I can see you're a good person. There's something I need to know. It's a long story, but could you please spare me half an hour? My name is Tammy, and you are Mrs. Mahan. I've just finished my shift. I could give you some time soon." They left the hospital grounds together. Tammy suggested sitting in a cafe where she recounted everything she had overheard through the open window. "You say your last name is Kingler?" Mrs. Mahan repeated, as if trying to remember. "You were here 5 years ago. I recall a woman with such a last name." "Yes, it was a complicated case. All the doctors were anxious. It was their fault the baby had a problem. The woman had to have a cesarean section, but they made her deliver naturally. There was something wrong with the baby, but he was alive. That's for sure. And also, I heard the doctor say the baby should be transferred to an orphanage because the parents refused to take him. I wonder why they refused. The baby looked pretty normal." "Are you certain there were no fatalities, Mrs. Mahan? Are you sure you're not confusing this with another case?" "I'm not confusing anything. For the past 5 years, everyone at our maternity hospital has survived. There were weak babies and mothers with complications, but everyone survived. So my Bobby is alive, and Mara was talking about my baby. She's involved in this, and the head doctor and Garrett. Oh my God, Garrett has been hiding the truth from me all these years, and he's been talking to this Mara. All that Mara, she's trouble. As for the baby, Tammy, I'll find out more, I promise. Don't tell your husband anything yet. My daughter has been working in an orphanage for a long time. Maybe she can tell me something about your baby." "I don't know anything about him," Tammy sobbed. "I just named him Bobby. I don't even know his blood type, but you remember his birth date, don't you? Of course. It was September the 5th, all right. September the 5th, 5 years ago. I'll check with my daughter." They exchanged phone numbers and said goodbye. Tammy walked home, her legs heavy. She dreaded seeing her husband. She had so much to say, so much to ask, but Tammy feared hearing the whole truth. Worst of all, she had no one to confide in. Garrett had driven away all her friends, and she had no close people except for her daughter. The thought of Rosalie gave her some strength. Mommy Rosalie ran into the hallway to greet her. "Where have you been? I missed you so much." "Yes, where have you been?" Garrett called out irritably from the other room. "I came home to find our daughter alone. with nothing but sandwiches to eat. Tammy didn't answer her husband or even look at him. Lost in thought, she hugged her daughter and kissed her. "Are you hungry?" "Honey," a little Rosalie admitted, "but I had tea with Dad, so don't worry. I just came back from visiting Polly. Her mom saw me home. You're my clever girl. I'll cook something." Tammy went to the kitchen without glancing at her husband. "Tammy, what's going on?" Garrett followed her. "Why aren't you talking to me? Where have you been all day?" "Do you really want to know?" Tammy looked at her husband vacantly. Yes, he met her gaze. "I don't understand your tone." Tammy wanted to voice all her suspicions but restrained herself at the last moment. It wasn't time yet. "Garrett, I think you're cheating on me," she blurted out suddenly. Me, Garrett choked, then laughed. "Tammy, what are you on about? Have you been watching too many soap operas? I work my fingers to the bone so you and Rosalie can have the best. When would I have time to cheat on you? Then who is Mara?" Garrett's face changed for a second. Then he gave a surprised look as if remembering. "Mara, the brunette who works as a nurse." "Oh, Mara. That's my classmate. Why are you asking about her? I saw you together yesterday at the cafe." Garrett's cheekbones reddened, and he became visibly nervous. But after a second, he pulled himself together. "Yeah, she scheduled an appointment with me yesterday. A class is planning to get together this summer, so she called me to discuss the details, where we're going to celebrate, how, and so on." Garrett was lying on the fly, and Tammy realized it, but she pretended to believe him. "You're not lying to me, are you?" "Oh, come on, love." Garrett smiled. "I have only you in my heart." He put his arms around his wife and kissed her. Tammy wanted to push him away, to shout at him, to ask where their son was, but she restrained herself with the last of her strength and just put her head on his shoulder. She kept silent for a while and then pulled away and went about preparing dinner. "Tammy, is the incident over?" Garrett asked cheerfully. "Yes, dear." Tammy even smiled back at him, though her soul was in turmoil, and she was thinking about one thing: whether Mrs. Mahan would find out anything or not. That night, Tammy had a dream. She was walking through the forest when suddenly a wolf stepped towards her from the bushes. Tammy froze for a moment and looked into the eyes of the beast. Then suddenly she heard a child crying. Tammy shuddered, and the beast perked up. The wolf rushed to the place where the child's crying was heard. Tammy ran after him. In the clearing sat a little boy, smearing tears on his grimy cheeks. He looked around helplessly. "Mommy," he suddenly shouted when he saw Tammy. He got up and ran to her, but the wolf was ahead. The beast grabbed the child by the shirt and pulled him away. "No, no," screamed Tammy. "Don't touch him. Let him go." She ran after the wolf, screaming and crying. For a second, the wolf stopped, looked at her, and then Tammy realized that it was not a wolf but Garrett. A second more, and they, together with the child, dispersed like a fog. "Give him back. Give him back," Tammy repeated, shaking. She was awakened by Garrett shaking her shoulder. "Tammy. Tammy. What's wrong with you?" Garrett leaned over his wife. "Wake up." She opened her eyes. Her head ached, her heart was pounding frantically, sweat beaded on her forehead, and her teeth ached from clenching her jaws hard. "Was it a nightmare?" Garrett looked into her eyes. "You were screaming terribly." "Yeah, a scary dream," she said, exhaling. "You were calling for someone. I didn't understand. I was dreaming about our son." "Tammy, honey, it's been so long." Calm down, calm down. It's all gone. It's just a dream." Garrett held her against him, cradling her like a child. Tammy quieted down, calming a little, or maybe it was really all she had imagined. All that she had learned the day before was just a coincidence, but she had heard Garrett and Mara talking. Tammy pulled away from Garrett. "It's okay, I'll go back to sleep." She covered herself with a blanket and turned away from her husband. Soon he lay down next to her, hugging her. Tammy wanted to throw off his hateful hand, but she did not even move. Let him sleep. She herself lay there until morning, without sleep and without thoughts. Her head was as if empty. In the morning, Garrett kissed her and went to work. Rosalie slept in the nursery, and Tammy dozed off. She was awakened by a phone call. Mrs. Mahan called. "Tammy, I found out something, but it's not a phone conversation. Come to my place at 1:00, just as my daughter is coming over. She has something to tell you." Tammy immediately jumped out of bed and frantically began to pack. Then she sat down and calmed down a little. There was still time. She went to the kitchen and prepared lunch. "Mommy, what smells so good?" her daughter asked, rubbing her eyes. "I made your favorite red soup. Let's wash up, eat, and then we'll go out." Where to? Wondered the girl. "To a very nice grandmother I met recently. You'll sit quietly at her place and I'll talk to her." Soon Tammy called a cab and, at the appointed time, went to Mrs. Mahan. The woman lived in the suburb in a small but neat house. Now it was covered with blossoming apple trees, lilacs, and cherry blossoms. Mrs. Mahan came out onto the porch to greet her guests. "What a grown-up daughter you have," Mrs. Mahan beamed. "Well, young lady, would you like to come in with me to the vegetable garden? Your mom needs to speak with my daughter, and will only disturb them." "I just need to water the tomatoes and cabbage." "Tomatoes?" Rosalie asked, surprised. "Are they already red?" No, sweetie, they're just little sprouts now, but in time they'll bear fruit, Mrs. Mahon explained. She took the girl by the hand, and they headed to the plants while Tammy entered the house. A woman in her 40s peered out from the tiny kitchen. She was slightly overweight, with her hair tied in a bun and wearing glasses. Tammy was taken aback. What a stir. Daughter Mrs. Mahon, as she thought. Hello, the woman nodded. I'm Kathleen. My mother told me your story. To be honest, I shouldn't disclose such things, but this is a special case. Kathleen invited Tammy to the table, poured tea, and began her story. 5 years ago, I was appointed director of the orphanage. A boy had arrived with a grim diagnosis. Doctors believed his brain was damaged due to a difficult birth. They considered transferring him to a specialized institution, but for some reason, it kept being postponed. As time passed, it became clear the baby was perfectly healthy, developing like any other child. Soon after, Gloria came to work at the orphanage. In her early 30s, she immediately bonded with the abandoned child and soon set out to adopt him. She and her husband couldn't have children of their own. They'd undergone lengthy treatment, but the issue was with her husband. Without money for IVF, they decided to adopt. Eventually, they managed to take the baby home. I don't know if it's your boy or not, but the birth center and date of birth match. Kathleen continued, pausing for a moment, then gathering her courage. I shouldn't be telling you this, but Gloria passed away recently. Cancer took her in just months. Her husband, Marcus, and the boy were left alone. I know they've moved in with Marcus's mother. Everything would be fine, but Marcus started drinking heavily. His mother is ill, and the boy is left on his own. Tammy cried out, suddenly struck by a hunch. What's the boy's name? At the orphanage, they called him Eric. Eric, Tammy exclaimed. Could it really be him? I don't understand, Kathleen said, puzzled. Tammy confusedly told her about meeting the boy she'd photographed. She took out her camera, which she carried everywhere out of habit, and found the right photo. Here, is this him? Tammy pointed at the image on the camera screen. I remember him as very small, Kathleen admitted, but he looks just like him. He's the same bright child, yes. Very similar, Kathleen hesitated. She wanted to add that the boy looked like Tammy too, but stopped herself. What if it was all a mistake? Mom, it turns out that tomatoes are so tiny at first, and enthusiastic Rosalie appeared in the doorway. I was watering them. Mrs. Mahon said I could come and help her water them again. We'll come back, won't we? Yes, yes, of course, Tammy replied, still shaken from her conversation with Kathleen. She looked at Mrs. Mahon. Thank you. I just can't understand one thing. Why didn't you let me know at all? But you suddenly volunteered to help me. Why? It's an old school with the head doctor. Mrs. Mahon smiled sadly. I worked in that hospital all my life as a midwife. Before I retired, I was accused of negligence. They claimed a woman got serious health problems because of me. I was suspended from work and denied the benefits that medical staff are entitled to. But I wasn't to blame for that situation. The head doctor was operating on the woman, and it went poorly. Nobody would listen to me. So if your story is true, that chief doctor will be ousted from his position. I see, Tammy replied. You can be sure that if my son is alive, there will be consequences for all those responsible in this story. Both the head doctor and my husband Rosalie listened attentively to the adults but understood nothing. Mom, what son were you talking about? The girl asked when they were driving home. Sweetie, Tammy said, coming to her senses. I'll tell you everything, but a little later. Just don't say anything to Daddy yet about our visit, and don't mention anything you heard there. Okay, the girl nodded. Tammy realized she had made a mistake by discussing such matters in front of her daughter. But there was no going back. Later that day, she persuaded Rosalie to walk a little more in the park. Her daughter agreed. Tammy hoped she would see Eric today, and as if answering her prayers, there he was, running and jumping as usual. Tammy, he shouted joyfully, smiling. Where have you been? Were you scared of my daddy that time? He's good. He just acts tough. Do you know what he did with the picture you gave me? What? Tammy asked, tense inside. He framed it and hung it on the wall in the hallway. Grandma really liked the picture too. She said the photographer has a real talent. Thank you, Tammy laughed. And this is my daughter, Roz. The girl nodded to the boy, looking at her mom confusedly. Rosalie, this is Eric, a good friend of mine. The good friend was sniffing endlessly. Do you have a cold? Eric, Tammy asked, concerned. It's summer. How did you catch a cold? I ate a lot of ice cream. Daddy got a new job, so we have money now. The boy smiled happily. He bought me new jeans. Tammy noticed that the boy's shirt was new too. Yes, the kid had dressed up. You look great. Tammy smiled and took out disposable handkerchiefs from her purse. Let me wipe your nose. She immediately and deftly did so. The three of them walked around a bit more. Tammy ran to the pharmacy and bought Eric some vitamins. Afterwards, they walked the boy home. Good kid, smiled Rosalie. Tammy nodded thoughtfully. Rosalie, will you stay home alone for an hour? I still have to go on an errand. I'll be quick, okay? Mom. Tammy took her daughter home, and then rushed to the private clinic where genetic analysis was done. The handkerchief she used to wipe Eric's nose was suitable for the examination. When Tammy returned home, she was met by a furious Garrett. "Where did you disappear to again?" he shouted. "The daughter is alone again." "Tammy, what are you doing? And where did you take my daughter during the day, Mom?" I blurted Rosalie, whispering innocently. "It's all right, sweetheart." Tammy smiled encouragingly at her and looked at her husband. "Garrett, I had some errands. I went to see some good acquaintances." "What kind of acquaintances can you have that I don't know about? And what is this? You have a family, a husband, and a child. You should be taking care of the house, and yet dinner isn't cooked. And the house is a mess." "The house is in order," Tammy said calmly. "And the food is in the fridge. I'll heat it up." She went to the kitchen, but Garrett grabbed her arm. "What child are you looking for?" Rosalie mentioned something. "Tammy, are you losing your mind?" "I'm more sane than ever." Pulling her hand away, Tammy replied. "And since you're asking, I'll tell you. Yes, I'm looking for my son, but he's gone." "Tammy, come to your senses." "No, you definitely need a doctor." "We'll go to the doctor tomorrow, and you'll give him money to declare me incompetent." "Is that it?" "Manny, how much did you pay the head doctor of the maternity ward to put our son in an orphanage?" Garrett shook when he heard that. Then he began to insist that Tammy had made everything up, that everything was as it had been, that the child didn't survive. But Tammy didn't listen to him, as she had no intention of proving anything. She had other thoughts in her head. It had been 10 days of waiting. During that time, she didn't talk to her husband. She walked with her daughter in the park, where they met Eric and had fun together. Eric told her about his family. His father worked all day at some computer firm. Yes, his name was Marcus. Tammy's heart twitched with excitement. So many coincidences. Eric's grandmother seldom walked, only around the apartment a little. His mother's name was Gloria. Her life had been taken by a serious illness. Eric told her a lot about his life as they sat in cafes and walked around the city. Finally, Tammy received a call from the clinic informing her that there was a result. Tammy drove to the clinic with a sinking heart. What would they tell her? "I don't understand anything," she said excitedly to the lab technician who brought her the documents. Tammy read the numbers but couldn't believe it. "The results indicate that you and the person whose biomaterial was provided are close relatives." "How close?" "Like mother and son, for example." When Tammy heard that, she cried out and then wept. Yes, Eric is her son. It's her Bobby whom she's been mourning for so many years alive. That night, she decided to lay all the cards on the table before her husband. Garrett came home late, as usual. Rose was already asleep. Tammy sat in the living room on the sofa, the DNA test results in her hands, studying something there. Instead of greeting Garrett, who asked rudely, "I found my son," Tammy answered calmly, "He is alive and well." "What kind of nonsense are you talking again?" exclaimed Garrett. "Oh, you really need to go to the hospital, and you're going to jail." Without raising her voice, Tammy said, "Maybe you can now tell me how you got rid of our son. You looked me in the eye for so many years and lied. You yourself gave our child to the orphanage when I was between life and death." Garrett suddenly became gaunt, then took the documents from the clinic and read them. "Well, why are you silent?" Tammy tugged his sleeve. "Look me in the eyes now and tell me that our Bobby is dead." "How did you find him?" Garrett said in an unexpectedly horror-stricken tone. "After all, Mara and I spent almost 6 months looking for him." "Oh, so it was you and Mara? Tell me," demanded Tammy. "What is there to tell?" Garrett shrugged. "When the doctors said that our son would be mentally impaired, I immediately decided that we didn't need all that to torture ourselves and make him suffer." Mara worked at the maternity hospital in the children's ward as a nurse. "Yes, she really is my classmate. I talked to her. I told her that you didn't want to give up the baby. And then she suggested this option: pay the head doctor for a death certificate. That's how it worked out. While you were unconscious, they gave me the certificate, and I buried an empty coffin. Then the boy was taken to an orphanage, so while I was mourning him in the hospital, he was there, waiting for me." Tammy could barely hold back her tears. "And you lied to me, Tammy." "I meant well. Why would we need a disabled child? You decided for me. You robbed me of my son. What does it matter what he is? I would have loved him anyway. The most important thing is that he's a normal, good, bright kid. Doesn't it hurt your heart to know that your son is growing up with strangers? I've been following his fate all this time. Yes, a year later I found out he was adopted and seemed normal. Yes, I berated myself for this act, but what could I have done? So I decided to forget about it. Through Mara, I only found out how he was doing. Then the boy's foster mom died, and he and his foster dad disappeared. Mara and I looked for them, but we couldn't find them." With Mara, Tammy grinned. "She'd been driving a wedge between us too. She admitted she was even in our house when your secretary allegedly spilled coffee on your shirt. I saw her near our entrance, and then you in the house." Garrett shook his head. He couldn't admit it, but it was true. Mara had been in their apartment. They met to discuss where to look for the boy and his foster father. Garrett had run home for a minute to get some paperwork. Mara waited for him in the car. Then suddenly she came up to get him. He opened the door, and she hugged him, pressed herself against him, and began to undress herself. It was an obsession, a mistake. Everything happened quickly. Garrett afterward began to say that his wife would come at any minute. Mara smiled understandingly and left. Then Tammy came in. Yes, he had cheated on her, but only once, but he couldn't admit it. Tammy, we were just looking for this child, he stubbornly repeated. A boy, a child? You talk about him as if he were a stranger. Garrett, this is your own son. His name is Eric now. I only have a daughter. Garrett, raise your voice, and enough about it. Let him grow up in another family. Everything is normal with him. As I understand it, that's good. I won't leave it like that. I'll make sure my son grows up with me, Tammy exclaimed. Forget it, Garrett shook his head. I won't allow it, and if you raise a fuss, I'll divorce you. Yes, I'll divorce you, and I'll take Rosalie. The court will give me custody. What do you think you are? You're worthless, unemployed, living off me. You're nothing without me. That's how you talk, Tammy chuckled. Aren't you the one who made me like this? But you're wrong if you think I'm so spineless. I'll leave you anyway, and take my daughter away from you. That night, Tammy slept in her daughter's room. Although it's difficult to call it sleep, the woman lay all night with her eyes closed, thinking about what she should do now. She wouldn't be able to live on as before. Garrett disgusted her, and Eric must be taken away. She wouldn't give up Rosalie. In the morning, Tammy opened her eyes as soon as the front door slammed behind her husband. Kissing her sleepy daughter, she carefully got out of bed and went to the window. A new day was beginning, and Tammy was starting a new life. She was getting used to the idea of having her son around. There was only a little bit left, and they would be together. According to Eric's stories, it turned out that his adoptive family loved him, even though they lived simply. The father drank for a while, which was understandable as he had survived the death of his wife, but now it seemed to be all right with him. By lunchtime, when Rosalie was already watching a children's TV program in her room, Tammy made up her mind. Daughter, I'll go away for half an hour. Will you be okay alone at home? She looked at Rosalie, who nodded in response. Tammy had calculated everything. Garrett wouldn't be home for 7 hours, and Marcus, Eric's foster father, would come home at lunchtime. They needed to meet and talk. Grabbing the DNA test documents, Tammy headed towards the old 5-story building. Eric, a chatty boy, had long ago told her which entrance he lived in and which apartment. An elderly woman in a wheelchair opened the door. Who are you? She was surprised, blindly looking at the guest. I don't know you. My name is Tammy, the woman said worriedly. Your grandson and I sometimes walk together in the park. Ah, Tammy, the woman smiled. Eric was talking about you. The picture you took was a good one. Come in. Eric ran to the neighbors. We're out of sorts. Marcus came for lunch, and I hadn't finished sorting the soup. And as luck would have it, the salt shaker is empty. Oh, Marcus is at home. Then please call him. We need to talk. The old lady shrugged her shoulders and shouted, Son, come here. A tall man came out of the kitchen. He looked less gloomy now than he had at their previous meeting. You wanted to talk about Eric, he asked. Forgive me for the harshness last time. I wasn't in a good mood. Of course you can communicate with him. I realize that you're a good person. Thank you, Tammy whispered. But I have something else to discuss with you. Could we talk privately outdoors? And by the way, pardon me for interrupting your lunch, but it's critical. Yes, I've already realized that. Marcus grinned on the landing. They met Eric. Oh, Tammy, the boy said, surprised. Hello, Eric, the woman almost burst out with son, but she could hardly restrain herself. I've come to talk to your daddy. About what? The child asked in a businesslike manner. Eric, what's with the interrogations? Marcus grinned. March to the apartment. Your grandmother is waiting for salt. Outside the entrance, the adults sat on a bench. Tammy gathered her courage and pulled out the papers. Here's this. What's this? Marcus asked. It may seem absurd, but I'm Eric's birth mother, Tammy explained. Marcus looked at Tammy, confused, then at the papers. Tammy, worried, began her explanation. She told everything as it happened. Marcus listened, his head lowered. I won't ask how you found us, he finally said, but if you try to take Eric away from me, I won't keep quiet. I'll go to court. Marcus, please understand. I'm in shock myself, Tammy tried to explain. I don't want any litigation, especially since my husband isn't behaving appropriately in this situation. I just want to communicate with Eric. And what will you tell him? That you gave birth to him and abandoned him. Understand, he considers another woman his mother. Can you imagine what that would do to the child? I understand everything, and I don't know how to improve it. That's why I came to you, just to talk. Together we'll find a solution. I believe it together. Are you kidding me? You abandoned a sick child like an unnecessary kitten, and now you come to your senses. I didn't abandon him. That doesn't change anything. What do you want? You want me to give you Eric. What do you want him for? You have a daughter, so raise her, especially since, as you say, your husband isn't happy about finding your son. I'll leave my husband. I'm not going to live with him after what happened anyway. I don't need that information, and don't come to us anymore. I forbid you to see Eric." Marcus resolutely stood up and headed for the entrance without looking back. Tammy remained seated on the bench, seemingly petrified. Yes, Marcus could be understood, but who would understand her? 5 years ago, she was lied to and deprived of a child, and now, when she suddenly found him, it turns out that she has no rights. Indeed, Eric considers that deceased woman to be his mother. Tammy cried. That's how she suddenly found her son, and at the same time couldn't get him back. Tammy slowly approached the house. At the entrance, she saw her husband's car. The next moment, her husband and Rosalie came out of the house. "Mommy," the daughter cried and rushed to Tammy. But Garrett intercepted her. "Go to the car," he commanded the girl. "Mommy." I said, "Get in the car," Garrett shouted and pushed Rosalie into the cabin. Then he turned to Tammy. "What did you think? You can behave as you please? Who do you think you are? You should have done what I told you to do. I told you to forget about that kid. What did you do? You ran straight to his foster dad. Were you crying about there, telling him what a bad husband I was? How do you know I followed you? I saw you sitting on the bench. How he sent you away anyway. It's like this. Rosalie and I are leaving now, and I won't tell you where, but I don't want to see you in the apartment. In 2 days, I'm divorcing you. If you obstruct me, I will not allow you to see your daughter. Do you understand?" No, you wouldn't dare do that to me," screamed Tammy, crying. "What's my fault? You behaved like the last scoundrel. You say you followed me. Didn't you want to look at your son?" "He is not my son," Garrett cut her off. At this time, Rosalie was crying in the car. Garrett got into the car and drove away. Tammy rushed after her daughter but stopped, feeling empty. Then she fell on the pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. Her life had shattered into small pieces. How could she put everything back together now? Marcus was walking to work, agitated after his conversation with Tammy. What kind of a mother is she? Poor, unfortunate. No way, she is a cruel liar. Marcus remembered how he and Gloria first brought Eric from the orphanage. He was just a baby then, but he grew stronger and developed. The doctors turned out to be entirely wrong. The child was perfectly healthy and hit all his milestones on time. He talked, even babbled. Soon it was unstoppable. Everything in their family was fine until Gloria fell ill. At first they thought it was nothing serious, but by the time the doctors figured it out, it was too late to do anything. Gloria died. Marcus had loved her so much. They had been together since high school. Gloria had waited for him while he was in the army. They had dreamed of a large, loving family, but the big family didn't work out. When Marcus was left alone with a child in his arms, he felt so lost that he started drinking and quit his job. He had been a good programmer. His mother-in-law, assessing the situation immediately, insisted he move in with her. Marcus listened and gradually came to his senses, returning to work. Yes, he realized that Eric spent a lot of time alone and needed to go to kindergarten, and that his mother was very sick, but they would manage. And then, suddenly, this biological mom showed up. All she said was a lie. Of course, she did not give up her son. Such thoughts were in Marcus's head as he approached Tam's house. He witnessed the whole ugly scene, Garrett pushing his daughter into the car, shouting at Tammy. And what exactly he shouted, Marcus couldn't believe. A father could talk about his own child like that. For a moment, he wanted to intervene and hit this creep, but Garrett drove away. Marcus walked up to Tammy and held out his hand. "Tammy, please calm down." "Don't cry," Tammy asked, surprised as she wiped her tears. "What are you doing here?" "I was walking to my work. I saw everything, and now I believe you. He'd do a mean thing without blinking an eye. He'll take Rosalie away from me," Tammy sobbed. "I don't know what to do." "First, you need to calm down. Go home. Here's my phone number. Give me yours, and I'll call you this evening." Marcus held out a torn notebook page and wrote down the number Tammy dictated. "Please don't cry. Believe me, as long as we're alive, everything can be fixed." He walked her to the entrance and hurried to work. The rest of the day, Tammy lay on the couch and curled up in a ball, unable to sleep or get up. Her strength had left her. She dialed her daughter's number several times, but the phone was out of range. And then she got a call. "Daughter," Tammy shouted into the receiver without looking. "Excuse me, it's Marcus," she heard a confused male voice. "Ah, it's you." "I'm sorry," Tammy sighed. "I thought Rosalie was calling. I'm standing at your entrance. Can we talk?" Yes, come in." Tammy gave him the apartment number. Soon the guest was at her doorstep, looking a bit shaken. "Put the kettle on in the kitchen," Marcus said. "You have a nice place," Marcus noted, looking around the apartment. "It's not my apartment," Tammy replied sadly. "It's Garrett's property, and he's kicking me out." Just like that. "I thought I was going to leave my husband, but he threw me out and took my daughter away. Do you have somewhere else to go? To be honest, I don't. I'm so sick of it all. I don't want to live." "But you have to live. Tammy, I thought about what you told me and what I saw today, and I realized one thing: you don't resist fate. Let everything go as it goes. You'll see, everything will work out. So Garrett is going to give me his daughter. Never. But you still have a son, and you won't give him to me. Moreover, I'm less now. Do you have anyone you can turn to for help? Tammy didn't answer, only grinned sadly. Yes, over the years, Garrett had done everything to ensure she was alone and completely dependent on him. Marcus realized this without words. He thought for a while, then shook his head decisively. Pack up where to? Tammy was confused. You'll stay with us. Mom won't mind, and Eric will be happy. You know, he's so attached to you. He always comes from a walk and tells us how he walked with you, how he played with your daughter. He's drawn to you, and I can't live without him anymore. Tammy said quietly, nor without Rosalie. Marcus said nothing. Yes, now he saw before him an unhappy young woman who had faced enormous lies and betrayal in her life. How to help her? Marcus had only a vague idea, but on a purely human level, he couldn't help but respond to her pain. Tammy agreed to Marcus's proposal, and in a couple of hours, she was leaving the apartment where she had created a cozy family nest for so many years. She turned around to say goodbye. She left everything behind, taking only necessities: a camera, a picture of her daughter, and of course, her documents. Helen, Marcus's mother, seeing the now familiar guest, was very surprised. While she and her son whispered in the kitchen, Tammy and Eric sat in the living room. The boy showed her his toys and books. Eric was so happy. Where's Rosalie? The boy remembered. Will she also live with us? No, Tammy sighed. She's still with her daddy, but I hope we can see her soon. Meanwhile, let's look at this book together. She took out the alphabet book, and she and Eric began to study the letters. The boy already knew more than half of them. What a good boy you are, Tammy admired. A little more, and we'll be reading together. Yes, Eric has a good memory. Tammy heard Helen's voice behind her. The woman stood in the doorway, watching attentively as the guest studied with her grandson. Marcus had told her everything. Now, looking at Tammy and Eric, she noticed how much they resembled each other. In the depths of Helen's soul, a hope stirred. Perhaps her son could get along with this Tammy. He wasn't much older than her. They'd make a good couple, and Eric would have a complete family. 2 days passed. Tammy was adjusting to her new surroundings. She swiftly cleared the apartment until it sparkled and cooked various delicious meals. The elderly woman appreciated her guest's efforts and began hinting to her son to take a closer look, but Marcus pretended not to understand his mother's intentions. Eric followed Tammy around, helping with cleaning and cooking. He forgot about his street life, only asking about Rosalie. Such questions pained Tammy's heart. She knew nothing. Rosalie's phone remained silent. Garrett had blocked her calls. Suddenly, Tammy saw her husband's car pull up to his house, and he stepped out with Marat. This infuriated Tammy. He had assured her that there was nothing between him and Marat. Yet here they were, entering the apartment together. Tammy went to them. "What are you doing here?" Garrett asked rudely when he saw Tammy. "Where's my daughter?" She blocked their path. "None of your business," he retorted. "I've already filed the documents with the court. You'll get a summons. The judge will determine when you can see your daughter. Don't be surprised. I know where you live. Good people informed me. Just a thought, you're a fallen woman, running to that man who's raising the kid. How are you doing with him?" "Am I a fallen woman?" Tammy sneered. "I didn't bring a lover into our apartment, unlike you. Look better at your mistress, who doesn't hesitate to have an affair with married men," Garrett exclaimed. "Mara, sweetly, what is she saying?" In truth, Mara was only feigning indignation. She was actually delighted. At last, Garrett was hers. Yes, she had achieved her goal. After so many years, they were together. Back in the hospital, she had first whispered to Garrett that his son was born abnormal, telling all sorts of horror stories while the doctors were cautious about the prognosis. Mara described to Garrett all the horrors of life with such a diagnosis for the newborn, so Garrett believed her and agreed to give up the child. Mara then personally brought him all the papers from the doctor and quietly settled the whole story. She hoped that after all this, Garrett would leave his wife and come to her. She would then give him a healthy child. But no, Garrett stayed with his family, which angered Mara tremendously. She decided to remain close to Garrett, learning about the boy and passing on news about him while emphasizing that even if the boy seemed healthy now, it didn't mean anything. The disease could manifest at any moment. All the while, she was working on Garrett like a cunning fox. He was like a rock at first, but water wears away stone. Finally, Mara got her way, and everything worked out perfectly. Now, Garrett would definitely leave Tammy. Of course, Mara was a bit upset that Garrett had taken away his daughter, but she reasoned that if the court granted custody to the father, she would convince Garrett to send the girl to the best boarding school, letting her live at a distance. "Garrett, she's insulting me," Mara added in a trembling voice. Garrett, his face purple with rage, glared at Tammy. "Don't you dare say anything bad about Mara and forget your way here. We'll be divorced soon, and you can live with your puppy." That puppy is your son too, Tammy said bitterly. Though, how many times must I say it, Garrett? I want you to hear it. I won't report to the police. I'll keep quiet about what happened in our family, but you should bring Rosalie back to me. Should I? Garrett sneered. Our daughter will live with me, and I don't care what you report to the police. I have such connections that you'll be silenced. That was the end of their conversation. Garrett and Mara entered the building, and Tammy watched them go. No, she wasn't crying or even angry. In her soul, a grand plan to destroy her husband had finally matured. She didn't want that. She suggested they work things out calmly, but he wouldn't. That evening, Tammy asked Marcus how skilled a programmer he was. Well, people don't seem to complain, Marcus shrugged. Why do you ask? I want to access Garrett's accounting department at work. I think there might be some shady business going on there. What do you mean? I suspect there's some double bookkeeping happening. I decided to take down your husband, Marcus smiled. I didn't start this. Tammy replied thoughtfully. He's been yelling that I won't get any truth from the prosecutor's office or the police about the children, so I'll take another route. I need to access their accounting reports and send them to the tax office. Let them investigate. Meanwhile, I'll contact the magazine where I used to work. Who knows, maybe they would like to get me back. Well, I won't try to change your mind. You're doing the right thing. That evening, Marcus managed to access the computers of both Garrett's firm's chief accountant and Garrett himself. Indeed, Tammy's suspicions were correct, and a considerable amount of money was being funneled into fake accounts, and double bookkeeping was taking place. Tammy copied all the data and sent it to the tax office. Then she met with the editorial staff of the magazine. Tammy, it's a shame you left our publication. You're an excellent photographer, said the editor-in-chief. I wouldn't mind coming back, Tammy replied. But as I recall, your husband didn't want you to work. That doesn't matter anymore. We're getting a divorce. The editor-in-chief was very surprised and offered Tammy a job with probation. A few weeks had passed. I know he's having a lot of trouble at work right now, Tammy told Marcus one evening. It's not surprising. He always thinks only about himself. Apparently, the thirst for profit has turned his head. You did it cleverly, Marcus said. Now they'll give Rosalie to you for sure. By the way, do you know where she's been all this time? Yes, she called me. Garrett put her in a private boarding house to keep her out of the way. That's how much he loves his daughter. Rosalie cried, asked me to take her, and I promised we'd meet soon. Tammy paused for a moment, thinking, I should probably start looking for an apartment. Do you know if anyone's renting in your building? Why do you need that? Marcus was surprised. Well, how else? If they give me Rosalie, and I'm sure they will need somewhere to live. We can't make you feel cramped. Although, to be honest, it's already hard for me without Eric. We'll find something for sure. I'm worried about other things, said Marcus. You have a place to live, but what about a job? Garrett still has more financial opportunities. You think I visited the magazine editorial board for nothing? Tammy laughed. They hired me and offered a very decent salary, so I'm prepared for the trial. The divorce proceedings followed, and the court took everything into account. The recent events at Garrett's firm, his relationship with another woman, and more. In the end, Tammy and Garrett divorced, with their daughter staying with her mother. The court also considered the provision of property, and Garrett had to pay Tammy almost half of everything. But this is her revenge. Mara shouted across the courtroom upon hearing the decision, for the fact that her son was given to the orphanage. What son? What orphanage? The judge asked, surprised. Mara, realizing she had said too much, tried to backtrack but eventually burst into tears and told everything. Tammy, why didn't you say a word about this story? The judge asked sternly after listening to Mara. After all, you're the injured party. I didn't want to stir things up. Why should I? My son is with me now, and you've returned my daughter. I don't want to take revenge on anyone. Life will sort itself out, but now the prosecutor's office will handle this, replied the judge. Mara shrieked when she heard this, and Garrett turned pale. What a fool, he whispered to Mara, as she dissolved into bitter tears. Some time passed after these events, and soon Tammy and Garrett met in court again. Mara and other maternity hospital employees, including the head doctor, were there. All of them were visibly disturbed, and for good reason. As a result, the head doctor lost his position and received a sentence for several years. Mara received a suspended sentence. Garrett, however, avoided criminal responsibility this time, getting off with compensation for moral damages to Tammy. The amount was substantial, equivalent to the cost of their former apartment. The ex-husband didn't argue and simply handed over the housing documents. After the trial, Garrett had nothing left but to pack his remaining belongings into his car and leave the city. No one knows where he went. Mara, by the way, refused to leave and now sells cosmetics at the mall. After a few months, Tammy returned with her children to her family home. Now there was nothing to remind them of the old environment. Marcus had done a good job renovating. Now Marcus and Tammy are together. Somehow it all worked out so well. They seemed to be just friends. And then one day love blossomed, such love that Tammy realized these were real feelings. They haven't told Eric the whole truth yet and probably never will. Why should he know that he was once betrayed by the closest person? There's one more person in this story who is satisfied with the result. Mrs. Mayon, the head doctor, has been punished. After all, she and Tammy are still in touch. Now Tammy, her children, and her husband visit her regularly. They even helped renovate her house with the money she received from Garrett. Tammy was able to open a small photo studio. Now she's even a famous, in-demand photographer at various celebrations, birthdays, anniversaries, and weddings. She especially likes shooting weddings. Every now and then she whispers to herself, "This is true happiness."